Shalom. This week we are reading Parshat Behaalotcha, the third Torah portion in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers. The whole experience of reading the book of Numbers is so unique. All the things that the people of Israel are going through as a nation, there's a pattern, there's a process. You can tell that there's nothing haphazard here. There are incidents, there are accidents, there are things that seem to be disconnected, but there's a general theme that's being built up of the things that the nation is going through in order to actualize, to hone principles, to really bring home certain attributes, to work out certain themes that they will need on the level of their spiritual infrastructure in order to become the kingdom of priests and the holy nation that God has intended for them. So the whole time that they're in the desert, throughout all their wanderings, they have this unusual, special relationship with God. They're connected through this umbilical cord. They have the manna, they have the water of the well. They're in some sort of protected environment, some sort of incubator. And they are meant to go through the things, the challenges that they have to rise to in order for them to really clarify on a soul level those things that need to be worked out in both their national character and their lives as individuals. And that, I think, is the key to understanding everything that's going on in the book of Numbers. Now, at the same time, we understand that mistakes are made. There's a lot of mistakes that are made. There are a lot of challenges that are not met. There are a lot of failures. And we need to understand the nature of the sins that are described in the book of Numbers as well. Now, looking at Parshat Behaalotcha, I have this idea that when we look at Parshat Behaalotcha, we can almost see to ourselves that there's a certain theme that seems to be running through the topics that appear in this week's Torah portion, and that theme is the theme of responsibility, one of our favorite themes, and certainly one of the core principles that God seeks to drive home in the consciousness of the people of Israel throughout this experience in the desert, to take responsibility, to learn about responsibility. But look, first of all, Aharon has to take responsibility for lighting the menorah and making sure that the flame rises up straight and high. The Levites have to take responsibility for their duties. The concept of Pesach Sheni is about responsibility, in that the duty of Israel's testifying to the oneness of God in the world as represented by the Passover offering is so profound that it can't be abrogated by some sort of circumstances. So not only is Pesach Sheni an issue of the individual's right for a second chance, as we've taught before, but it's also an emphasis on the responsibility of the nation to go through with everything that Passover represents. Certainly, even when it comes to the concept here described in the Parsha of the camp, the following the signs of when to move forward, when to camp, when to break camp and continue. Moshe's responsibility of blowing the trumpets. The list goes on and on. There are issues here of the collective and individual responsibility of the nation. But regarding the subject of the chata'im, the mistakes, the sins that are described in the book of Numbers, again, it is almost an exact science. It's a very perplexing and very specific area of study in understanding why the things that were committed here, that sometimes on a surface level to us do not seem to be so serious, do not seem to warrant the punishment / consequences, because really there's no idea of punishment as much as there's an idea of the consequences that we bring forth ourselves. The sins that we see don't seem to be that serious. Many of them don't seem to be related to deed. They seem to be related to thoughts, to words, things that an earthly court would not punish someone for. So, here, in Parshat Behaalotcha, in chapter 11, we meet up with these complainers. The people took to seeking complaints. It was evil in the ears of Hashem, and Hashem heard, and his wrath flared, and a fire of Hashem burned against them, and it consumed at the edge of the camp. And our sages tell us that this too is a reference to the mixed multitude that began this campaign of literally seeking to complain, finding something to complain about. There's an idea that Rashi tells us, what is it that happened here? What were they complaining about? They were saying, 3 days we've been traveling, 3 days we haven't rested. And Hashem was angry because his thought was, the very thing that I'm doing for your own good, you turn into something to complain about. The reason that you are on the move now is to bring you right away into the land of Israel. And then we find this next verse, the rabble that was amongst them, the asafsuf, the rabble that was among them cultivated a craving. And the children of Israel also wept once more. This is the instigation of the rabble who cultivated a craving. In Hebrew, hitavu ta'ava. And they said, who will feed us meat? And this is a really unusual usage here in Hebrew. In this verse, they cultivated a craving. They didn't really have a craving, ta'ava, which represents the word, it represents a longing, a desire, a lust, a wanting, which can be also physical, which is generally associated with a more base, lower desire. They wanted to feel this, the rabble, and they got the children of Israel onto it as well, because the problem was that ta'ava really comes from food. It comes from the way that we live. The food that we eat can bring us to a level of heat, can bring us to a level of desire. But the manna didn't do that, because the manna was a spiritual food. So they looked at themselves and they really wanted to want. They looked at themselves and they said, we really need to get onto a meat diet because we're not feeling like normal people. We're not feeling the burning fire of desire. So they actually craved to have a craving. They cultivated a craving. And the manna didn't do that for them. But Hashem had told them, you shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And that means responsibility. And essentially, by cultivating a craving, what it really means, because again, we were discussing the idea, these sins, they don't seem to be cataclysmic, chain of deeds that will have an effect, an irrevocable effect on others. They don't seem to be things in the realm of overt rebellion. These are fine concepts. These are sins that seem to be in the realm of thought, of something, of a principle. And here they were complaining, and the secret of their complaint is that on a level of desire, on a level of wanting to want, on a level of identifying that which they realized was missing from the menu, because they were on as straight a narrow path that was intended to cultivate within them a separateness and an element of consciousness that otherwise they would be missing. By cultivating this desire, by cultivating this craving, essentially they were attempting to undermine not only their commitment to holiness, but also their level of dveikut, their level of closeness to God, their level of relationship. And precisely the reason for the seriousness of this sin, of the cultivating the craving, was because it affects the very foundations of who they are as a people. Because now, during these desert years, everything that we're reading about and studying about in the book of Numbers this is the time when the nation is becoming the people of Israel. This is the time when all of the challenges to rise up and to take the responsibility for being that nation of priests are presenting themselves. And the greatest call of the people was to recognize what God is doing for us so that we will have our eyes open, we will be facing forward, and we'll be able to rise to the challenge. And we find consistently that the mistakes in the book of Numbers and the challenges that were not met and the trials and the tests that were failed were issues of not staying focused. Eyes open, face front, staying focused on the goal of marching into the land of Israel as the people of God, there to precipitate a spiritual revolution that will affect the entire world, to show that there can be a family of man that lives completely focusing on the challenge of becoming the people of God.